Hello and welcome to the Ann Film Scoop. I'm Phelim McAleer.
And I'm Ann McElhenney.
And it's week 71. That's 1 year, 4 3/4 months since the 2-week two-week lockdown to flatten the curve. Never trust the government to tell you when they tell you something's temporary. And also, it's also 7 weeks, isn't it, since it was revealed that Hunter Biden used the N-word and the mainstream media have not reported on it. Anyone else would be cancelled in a heartbeat. So what's on the show today?
I think we have very big news about the Hunter Biden movie, so I'm excited to hear that.
Yes. And climate will be the new COVID. We hear from Mark Morano of Climate Depot about how basically they're setting us all up, that there's going to be there is actually a climate emergency, and we need to destroy Western civilization in order to save it. And I like this particular story. Kodak, Kodak was the film that was used to expose so many atrocities and so many great anti-war pictures. And Kodak was used to chronicle our history for the last over 100 years. And they just don't want now, they want photographers to use their film as much as possible, except they just don't want them to expose Chinese atrocities, because Chinese atrocities are different. And I suppose, what's with the mainstream media and Cuba? Why won't they say the word socialism and communism? The verbal gymnastics that they go to try and get around explaining why people are protesting in Cuba. And we have a special...
we have a very special... I want to say this because I'm very excited about this, because I'm in Ireland and I'm in a secret location in Ireland or whatever. And I was unable to cook this week, but it turns out that my husband has decided to save the podcast from being a recipe-free podcast. And so as long as I've known Phelim, his speciality, his famous speciality, and by the way, really yummy speciality is what's coming to you today. And I won't reveal that in advance, but I am excited for him to explain how he made it. And I think that'll be very fun. And I think, are you going to bring it outside onto the patio, Phelim, in my absence?
I haven't decided yet. I just want to say, you're in a secret location and you can't do the recipe. What? Cat got your hands? What? Like, they've no cooking.
Oh.
They have no cooking facilities in Ireland. What? They have no cameras. They've got what?
By the way, can I just say, and I don't know if I emphasized this enough last week, that last recipe, the recipe for the scones, people really need to try it. It's going to make you a complete rock star in your own house. It is unbelievably easy, and God, they're great scones. I mean, it's one of the best things I've cooked in a really, really long time. And I'm going to be bringing a new recipe to you next week. Promise. And I won't even reveal that in advance. But anyway, that's getting ahead of ourselves, Phelim. Yes. The first thing we want to come to today, actually, is huge.
Well, hold on. We have to explain.
What is it, Phelim?
We have to explain that you are in Ireland.
I am in Ireland.
In a secret location that is apparently so secret it's bereft of any cooking facilities. And... But to be honest, you are very busy and on the secret project that you cannot talk about, that is going to a outlet near you very shortly, or in a while.
Yes.
It's a great project. Everyone will appreciate it when it comes out.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
So so we have talking of projects. We have big news. We've hit $1 million raised for the My Son Hunter movie, and it's wonderful. It's great news. People have been very, very generous. People know this is an important story, revealing the truth about Hunter Biden to as many people as possible. You've been very generous.
We're very grateful.
Our target is 2.5. We start filming in October in Serbia, in the middle of October. That's set in stone. We need your help to get us towards the 2.5. The total project is 2.5, and that's what we need really to make this a success. We're starting to film. We're starting to hire people. We know we're going to raise the money, but we need you to come in now and really help us get,
and also at this point, I think maybe one of the things we need you to do is for you to tell your friends, tell people that who would care about this and would care about the fact, we need to get clever about ways of getting information out to the public. And the traditional ways, think tanks or writing articles in the newspapers are gone. Traditional media is gone from a conservative point of view. So getting these stories out, getting this truth out about what happened with the Bidens, we need to be really clever, and we're being very clever. We're making a super entertaining film, by the way, the kind of thing that anyone would want to watch, and particularly people who are undecided maybe on what's going on, and we're uninformed, by the way, and we know from the Media Research Council, we know from them that people didn't know this story. There's an incredible amount of ignorance about what happened. Media Research Center, sorry, there's an amazing amount of ignorance about this Hunter Biden story, about the Bidens. So, please tell your friends.
Just to sum it up, Hunter Biden, just to sum it up, Hunter Biden was getting $86,000 a month. 83 from a Ukrainian oil and gas company, whilst being a crack cocaine addict. He was a partner in a $1.2 billion Chinese investment fund. He got $100,000 in spending money from a Chinese businessman. He got an $86,000 gold ring from another Chinese businessman, diamond ring.
And even all those stories that Phelim's mentioning, that isn't even all of it. This is going on right now today. So he has now decided he's an artist. He is creating art. He is going to be selling that art for up to $500,000. And the people who buy that art will not be identified. The White House had a really good time to think about this, consider this, go through all the potential ethical dilemmas this may present, and they have come up with this fabulous solution to answer the ethical, potentially difficult problems that this might complicate. And they've decided, what we'll do? Yeah, we're going to keep it all secret. That's the best solution. So here's a guy who is going to paint on paper, by blowing paint through a straw, whatever, and he is going to get $500,000 from unidentified people, and nothing to see here, nothing at all to see here. Forget about his 83,000 from the Ukrainians once a month. This is a fantastic way of receiving an enormous sum of money, and we are never going to know where the money came from. And it's clean once that's happened because of the process, because of the legal system in the United States. This is totally legal. So he can just amass a fortune now, while his father is the president of the United States, and we don't know who's given him that money. And
we also don't know how much of it is going to the big guy. Because Hunter Biden sent an email saying 10% for the big guy. He talked in another email about 50% of a deal being reserved for Joe Biden. Hunter Biden's business partner, Tony Bobulinski, said the big guy is Joe Biden. So how much of the artwork purchases will go to the big guy's retirement fund? These are the questions that aren't being asked. These are the questions that need to be answered. These are the questions we're going to be posing and exposing in the My Son Hunter movie. So please go to mysonhunter.com. Give what you can. It's going to be a lot of fun making. It's going to be a lot of fun putting it out, but we need your help. You've been very helpful all along. We're going to get there, and thank you very much. Now we're going to go to our first interview. Actually, it's going to be wonderful. Mark Morano of Climate Depot. We filmed it just before we came on air, but due to Ireland's crap internet, we're always worried that Anne is going to fade into oblivion as the evening goes on. So we recorded that earlier this morning. So let's hear Mark Morano talk about how climate is going to be the new COVID and how much we all love the libertarian. And we're joined now by Mark Morano, who actually needs no introduction. He's the founder of Climate Depot, has written many books on the climate, is the foremost expert on climate politics and the climate wars in North America and in the world. Actually has a vast encyclopedic knowledge. And welcome to the show, Mark. First question, why aren't you dead? I believe you're in South Dakota, or is it North Dakota? South Dakota. Why aren't you dead? Because I believe everyone was dying there of COVID because they had a Republican governor.
This was the graveyard state because they didn't lock down. They didn't have mask mandates. South Dakota is doing great. It's one of the few states, and I do mean few states. I mean, South Dakota, Florida. I don't include South Carolina, Texas. I don't include Idaho. These are all with Republican governors who fell hard for this and imposed statewide mandates and other things. But really, the two that stand out are South Dakota and Florida when it comes to the COVID. 19, rejecting public health advice, and they've done great. And people will say, oh, well, they had more test cases. I believe public health, when a defiant governor like Kristi Noem here in South Dakota would refuse to lock down, same in Florida, they probably just sent more tests here in order to get the more positive cases, in order to say, see, they're not following our advice. So, but anyway, it's doing great here. It's pure freedom. Everyone loves it. I talked to everyone from Uber drivers, hotels. They can't even imagine what the rest of the world went through during the COVID lockdowns, because they didn't go through it here. But I'm here for Freedom Fest, and we're having a big debate on Friday. There were elements of the conservative libertarian movement who want to say climate change is a problem and we need a solution, and we need a free market solution. But they want to concede the entire narrative, and they want to claim that storms are getting worse, that we're facing dire temperatures, that we're facing a crisis, and that we need conservative solutions, not socialist ones like the Green New Deal. So, well, we do agree that we don't need socialism.
Yeah.
We're going to be debating these young climate activists
on
that issue.
It's hard to really, it is a full bore onslaught at the moment. And I'm just going to put up some pictures there of just New York Times headlines.
Yes.
The world is, it is like, in the apocalyptic movies where you are in the post-apocalyptic dystopia, and they always have the little 3-minute introduction, and we are now living through the 3-minute introduction in the media anyway, because it's China and Germany flooding and wildfires and Flagstaff and the wine country is burning. I mean, vineyards are being destroyed every day. I mean, are vineyards getting cheaper in Napa? I don't think so. But so it is. We're in this 3-minute pre-apocalyptic doom and gloom. Tell us about that. Tell us about extreme weather. How unusual is extreme weather? And tell us why they're doing it and what's ahead for us.
Well, first of all, yesterday in the United States Senate, we had extreme weather expert Dr. Roger Pielke Jr. testify. And apparently it was an eye-opener for many of the committee members who were just scratching their heads as he presented UN and government report data showing that quite literally, I'm not saying this metaphorically, literally on every measure of extreme weather, from hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, wildfires, on every single measure, there's not only not increasing incidences, there's decreasing. It's declining on climate timescales, on decadal climate scales. He had the charts, the information. Senators were stunned. And this is what's so shocking is then you watch the media, then you see Republican climate activists like I'll be debating, then you see anyone else in the climate community, if you will, claim that every day is more proof of man-made global warming. This is insidious. It's nonsense. What they've done, and I try to simplify this for the public, this is like going into a casino and looking at the wall of people who've won the slot machine lotto, and they're there with the big cardboard checks. If you go walk in that casino and look at that wall of winners, you're going to think everyone's a winner. Oh my gosh, we got to get to a casino. Did you see all the people winning? Winners are happening every day, every minute. People are winning tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. I saw $1 million plus winners. We got to get to that casino. That is essentially what the media has done with every extreme weather, the finger of CO2. Anywhere on the globe, they run around, this is evidence, and they put it up like the stupid lotto winner or the casino slot winner with the big cardboard check and say, this is what we're facing. When if you look at it in reality, whether you play the lottery or go in a casino, the overwhelming statistics, odds, and data show you are going to lose and lose big. And that's what they've done with extreme weather. It is just nonsense to the core. And they've taken it an extra step. Every time there's a heat wave, flood, drought, hurricane, they now say that attribution studies, the fingerprint of CO2 is all over these studies, all over these events. So we are just facing the age of stupid right now. And unfortunately, it's very sophisticated stupid, because you see all these things, you see people suffering, you see a heat wave in Germany, you see a flood in China, you see a heat wave in the Northwest, whatever it is. and you think, oh my gosh, this looks bad. And then they always say it's a record. Well, you're always going to break a record somewhere on the globe. And that's what records are for. No matter where you are, a record's going to be broken every day. Yeah, that happens all the time.
Yes. And one of the things that they don't do is don't give any context to those records. You know, they say things like, you know, this is the hottest day. And obviously I'm actually in Ireland, as you know, at the moment. And we have a heat wave here, a quite unprecedented heat, you know, 30 degrees centigrade, which is a lot of heat for Ireland this whole week. But what they don't say, they say since records began, like as though that's something, right? And records began, you'd swear that was since the Stone Age. The records probably started 100 years ago, maybe even less. And yet, I think one of the things that we've said many times on our podcast is when you hear a story that's given without context, you think, there's a reason why they don't want any context here, you know? Because as you say, these awful floods, these awful things. Why don't you give some context to that? And I think this is what you're saying, that Robert Pilkey Jr., I think that's probably what he did, was give lots of context to these things. Here's one thing that I wanted to ask you, Mark, because this is what I think Phelim and I talked about this recently, just ourselves. It feels to me, and you please correct me, it feels to me like the Republicans have just given up on even discussing climate change. I don't hear anyone. There was a time when you and I first met where, you know, there was quite a lot of conversation about and debate about climate change. I feel like there's no debate going on anymore. If it wasn't for you and a few people like you, you know, this would not be a subject. I mean, you're fighting the good fight, but what's happened to the Republicans?
In 2003, John McCain was co-sponsoring cap and trade bills all the way 2005, 2007, 2009. Lindsey Graham, a lot of Lisa Murkowski, they all supported climate solutions. So first of all, they've always been that branch of the Republican Party.
Newt Gingrich was on a bench with Nancy Pelosi.
With Nancy Pelosi.
Yes. Maybe we'll find that. Let's
find that picture.
Let's find that picture. Let's find that ad. Yes. Let's play a little clip of that right now.
Hi, I'm Nancy Pelosi, lifelong Democrat and Speaker of the House.
And I'm Newt Gingrich, lifelong Republican, and I used to be Speaker.
We don't always see eye to eye, do we, Newt?
No, but we do agree our country must take action to address climate change.
We need cleaner forms of energy, and we need them fast.
If enough of us demand action from our leaders, we can spark the innovation we need.
Go to wecansolveit.org. Together, we can do this.
That'll give you a little indication of where they were. Tell us about their trajectory now, and have those Republicans gone away?
Well, first of all, and Newt Gingrich also debated, in quotes, John Kerry, where he conceded the entire climate argument in his opening remarks, to John Kerry's shock, around the same time as he sat down with Nancy Pelosi. What happened was, Republicans, if you go back to Richard Nixon's presidency, when they created the EPA, every cabinet member of a Republican presidency, the EPA of all the cabinet members has been the most liberal of them all. And it's for one simple reason. Republican presidents, including not Ronald Reagan's necessarily his first term, but certainly by his second term, but with the exception of Ronald Reagan, I'll say, have basically said, I don't want to be seen as against the environment. And so let's just pick, someone who's not going to make waves. They always pick a progressive liberal, or the most liberal member of their cabinet is EPA. So what's happened is there's always been that wing of the Republican Party willing to appease. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be for the environment, but you don't be for the massive regulatory state. Because if you look back at the history of the environment, we've gotten better because we're wealthier. We have better technology. We have innovation. No one predicted the fracking revolution. The United States has led the world. Anyway, so what's happened now, just since President Obama's first term, we had ClimateGate, which turned even John McCain, Lindsey Graham back into climate skeptics. But then Mitt Romney ran in 2012, and the Republican Party started coalescing. But of course, Donald Trump was the aberration of Republicans. But right now, most Republicans, in fact, all of them, pretty much, other than, say, Senator James Inhofe, who's still fantastic on this, and Rand Paul or Ted Cruz, and a couple congressmen like Tom McClintock of California, you're not going to find, not only are they not going to be talking about it, to the extent that Republicans today talk about climate, like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy did a video in May, basically saying climate is a problem. Republicans want a solution. We're going to do carbon capture. We're going to plant trees. We're going to have more regulations. We're going to do solar and wind subsidies. God. They are just selling out. They don't want to deal with it. And that's sort of what this debate is about, because there's a whole wing of people who want the climate issue to go away. And they think appeasement is the solution. And they just don't want to deal with it anymore.
how big in the Republican Party would you say that wing is?
Well, there's two wings that are troubling. It's the wing that wants to completely sell out, like the House leadership. And then there's the wing that just doesn't want to deal with it. They'll vote against the Green New Deal. They'll rail on a Green New Deal, but they'll only talk about the economic costs of it. They won't go after the premise. I just watched a House hearing, the famous one in September 2019, when Greta Thunberg came. They had all these witnesses. They had, I think it was a teen Vogue activist, basic complete Marxist socialist. They had Greta Thunberg, who wants to shut down all economic activity, who's a corporate child crusader funded by all these interests. And then the Republicans put up a climate solution activist who literally praised Greta and the other panelists for raising the issue. So this is what happens. They don't want to deal with the science, but they want to be opposed to the solutions, but they're willing to spend a lot of money. Carbon capture, let's plant trees, let's keep our solar and wind. Even Michael Moore wouldn't support the Republican solutions. He's against all the subsidies against solar and wind, as I point out in my book.
Actually, it reminds me of the fracking wars, where you had all these corporate people and corporate lobbyists, right, for oil companies saying, basically the environmentalists were saying, you're poisoning children and you're poisoning people and you're setting people's water on fire. And their response was, jobs. Exactly. Jobs. And it's like, the actual response is, you are a lying liar from liardom in the city of Liartown, a county liar, McLiar, named after Liar, McLiar, in the United States of liardom.
Well done. Nice one. Yes.
Yes.
No, I love that.
Stop adopting their premise, which is based on lie after lie after lie. Fracking does not poison water.
It's one of the, Mark, it's one of the possible issues, scientific illiteracy or or the fear of, oh, well, I don't know much about that science stuff. I mean, is there some part of it that I really couldn't stand, I'm not feeling confident about talking to these very clever people who are really good at science.
A huge part of it. Yeah, there's two parts to that. If they do talk, they get ridiculed in the media, they get ridiculed in their local press, they get climate activists showing up at the town hall, their wives are upset, if they go to a country club, they go to a reception, people are like, oh, you're a science denier. But on the other hand, exactly what you said, you had people like John Boehner, who was the old Republican leader, he came out and said CO2 is not a carcinogen. He meant to say CO2 is not a pollutant. He got ridiculed. We have other people who will end up talking all about Mars or other planets, and they just get a little bit convoluted, other Republicans. So I can understand that. You don't really want to get them into the science, but all you have to do, it's a very simple thing, and we did this with Senator Inhofe, have the senator or congressman quote scientists, quote from a report, quote data. You don't have to get into all. The problem is they get too ambitious, and that's the problem. So that many of Republicans have been burned, and rightfully so, by the media, and that's what scares them off even further.
Well, politicians like grandstanding. You see, that's the problem.
Yes, it is the problem. Yeah,
they like talking politics, and I just want to go back. I don't think I really. I may have talked at length about the fracking versus jobs versus poison. When you say it's all about jobs, you're actually saying, yes, we are poisoning the water.
We're killing children. We're killing children, but you know what? It's
worth it for the jobs. And by the way,
it's great for the jobs.
What human being would say it's okay to poison children for jobs? Like, it's not. It's a madness.
It's mad. It's completely mad.
Well, and that's exactly. Yeah.
When you say, oh, yes, we are causing wildfires to destroy the town of Paradise in Northern California, but look at what the oil industry has done for jobs and progress and development. It's like, you monster, right?
Yeah, and they're right. They're right. If that's your argument, then
And that's the problem. When you concede the narrative that we face a climate crisis, climate emergency, that all these storms are getting, that all these kids' futures are endangered, suddenly you're like, well, look, we'll plant trees or we'll invest in carbon capture. That's nowhere near the scale. You're just as unscientific as the Democrats claiming a Green New Deal will stop hurricanes or floods or tornadoes or sea level rise. That is the problem. If Americans are a can-do spirit, if they think we face a crisis, we will spend any amount, bear any burden to fight it. We're not going to be like, oh, well, that's too expensive. Oh, yeah, that solution's too. Let's do a smaller version. And that's where Republicans really fail. It's that Me Too socialism, or, we support you, but we don't want to go that far. Well, if you're worried about an issue, are you going to go with the people who have a weak, tepid solution, or the ones who want to really solve it, like the Democrats claim to?
Republicans say, we're not spending that money on you. That's evil. That's bad. That's wrong. And the Democrats say, we're going to spend that money on you because we're nice people. Republicans can get in and spend the money anyway, right? Everyone knows they're going to spend the money and they're going to do the thing.
Yeah, anyway. I always say.
So who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for the nice person or the nasty person who tells you you're nasty?
Exactly.
Go on, Mark.
No, it's true. Republicans, one thing that's not controversial in Washington is spending money. So I even put that in the last chapter of my book. If Republicans want to blow money on carbon capture and on all this, carbon sequestration technology, if they want to plant trees, which, by the way, studies showed planting trees helps with global warming alleged, and also hurts, it accelerates global warming. So trees, you can pick either one. I have all these competing studies I collected that show you that any Republican who's touting trees as a solution hasn't looked at the science. So, but this is what we're facing. They want to sell out. They're tired of the battle. And that's what this battle here is. It's a tough debate to have because on one hand, here at Freedom Fest, on one hand, they're going to be claiming there's a problem. That's an easy debate. But on the other hand, they want the way forward is free market solutions. So I'm not necessarily opposed to opposing the Green New Deal and coming out with ways, of technological innovation, but you don't need massive government investment. Entrepreneurs, if Al Gore's right, and all these entrepreneurs are out there waiting to make tons of money, you don't need the government to pick winners and losers and ban energy that's proven itself, fossil fuels, and mandate energy that's not ready. Solar and wind less than 4% of our energy production. That's not going to take over the 80+% from fossil fuels in the next 10 or 15 years, and we're not going to achieve net zero.
And if it does take it over, you're going to have a Texas-style blackout multiplied by 100.
Yes,
you're going to have tens
all
of
over the
thousands
place.
of people die.
And because that story got so little coverage, basically nobody knows what happened in Texas. People aren't aware of the fact that this is coming to a town near you, to a city near you, to your state. And by the way, I think we were saying this earlier, to Europe. So Europe, the European Union have just signed up to doing something extraordinary in terms of this. I think you've written recently about this, Mark. What did the European Union, in their wisdom, decided to sign up for?
Well, they've been talking about their Green New Deal forever. So finally, the EU came forward with their net zero policies. And this is now, they're going to be this is going to be like a draconian policy that's going to be stifling all the economies of the EU in order to achieve what can only be called as an ideology at this point. They're looking at, you have to meet all these targets, all these goals. So here's what we have to do. We're going to go after transportation sector. In France, in order to meet these new EU guidelines, they're already announcing, Macron, the end of short haul flights. In other words, you can no longer, the airlines will be forbidden to have short airline flights. If you can take a train or a mass transit bus or some kind of mass transit, you will be forbidden from even having the option of a short flight because the emissions from a train are going to be lower. I think the best way to describe this is how Václav Klaus, the former Czech president, described it. He said the new EU climate plan is, quote, stupid and nonsensical. It's completely destructive to the lives, freedom, and living standards of the people of Europe. They've taken this ideology of net zero and every aspect of society. They're talking now, there's a UK energy report that recently came out talking about, first off, moratorium on any possible airports, shutting down existing airports in the UK. They're talking about essentially banning private car ownership and moving everyone to rental cars and removing mobility of movement. I mean, this is where we're headed. The EU climate plan is frightening. It's been compared by Rupert Darwall as the old Soviet system, except at least the Soviet system, they pretended to actually produce something. In this system, they're actually going to enforce complete degrowth and planned recessions in order to meet these new EU climate goals.
Do you have any good news at all, Mark? I mean, what?
I'm not optimistic. Yeah, if you want optimism, I really just say see the public is unaware. Biden administration is actually implementing the Green New Deal behind the scenes. So is Europe. They're doing it through the administrative state. You don't need hearings. You don't need a big vote of Congress or Parliament. It's all done. They're doing it behind the scenes, and no future Trumpian president can come in 4 years and undo what they're doing now. Whether it's transportation bills that are only 5% transportation and the rest Marxist socialism disguised as climate policy, or whether it's the Pentagon, or whether it's the Interior Department or State Department, every agency of Biden is a climate agency. They are winning. Yeah. They are winning without a fight.
I'm glad you said that. It's like, it's like the time the New York Times said they were disbanding their climate desk, and everyone goes, "Oh, this means climate is no longer, an important news." And I was going, "No, every reporter on the New York Times is a climate reporter."
That's right. They don't need one. I had a quick other question. Just a recent thing that happened. I'd be interested in your take on it. I'm sure you're aware that Van Jones just got himself $100 million from Jeff Bezos, with discretion to spend it any which way he wants on any charity he wants, including all of it on his own charity. What can we expect from Van Jones now that Van Jones has $100 million to push around? What's he going to do with it?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. Van Jones was actually praising the people I'm going to be debating Friday here as the kind of Republicans he likes. So this is, I don't know, Van Jones having that kind of money and power, that's fascinating. We'll see what he ends up doing. But you mentioned Bezos, and you have Richard Branson, and you have all these billionaires now engaging in space flight. Well, one thing's funny. You have the media shaming the flight shaming movement. We're not allowed to fly. We're told in a climate emergency we can only fly when it's, quote, morally justifiable, as Biden is being urged to declare a national climate emergency. Well, here you have the media sucking up to Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos for their big giant, it's like a few minutes in space equal someone flying around the trip multiple times in a commercial airliner. These are the most climate destructive, if you want to use their phrases. And the media is just like, how was it? All this, they're going gaga over them. And what's incredible about this is you got Bill Gates, who has actually said, we need longer lockdowns. People aren't going to be able to fly. At the same exact time, he's bidding for the world's largest private jet transport company. So we truly live in an age, a dystopian reality, and it's the age of stupid. And I've given up on the Republican Party. I frankly have given up on the Libertarian Party. I love the phrase, the Beltway Libertarians, because my theory on libertarians is very simple. And this is you think you'd have to be able to rely on them, but they are socially liberal. So the areas they can actually achieve legislation is in the area of when they align with progressives and liberals. With conservatives, they can almost never achieve success because you can never really fight big government. Government just continues to expand. The last year has been the greatest expansion of government power in our lifetimes, and I've never seen it in democracies. It's just never happened. There's no precedent for this, to what's happened for general wide. And libertarian groups, according to Tom Woods, who's a libertarian speaking of this, have across the country been almost silent on these lockdowns. So the people who should be fighting for us, the climate agenda, Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, silent, intimidated, or capitulating to the other side, appeasement. So that's why I'm not optimistic. Let's gouge our eyes out now. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's very disturbing. It's very disturbing.
I always felt that about libertarians. Many of the things that we talked about and made movies about at the beginning, they're classic libertarian subjects. It's about restricting people's freedoms, especially restricting people's freedoms in the developing world to develop just like we did, to have their mines, to have their factories, to have their to use their fossil fuels. But when I was getting my head cracked open by reporters and liberals and I repeat myself, standing beside me very often were the evangelical Christians, and the libertarians were at home smoking dope and watching porn or whatever they do.
If you go to a Libertarian Party convention, it's all pornographers and prostitutes. It's all that's what their passion is on the Libertarian Party level, not necessarily libertarian think tanks or events like Freedom Fest, but
it's just they're never there. They're never out. I was looking at the reporters saying they were suffering from PTSD after covering the Capitol riots.
Yes.
Friends of mine give me a poster for my birthday and in it, and they had to edit some of it out, are all the pictures of me getting punched by various protesters
Yeah.
over the years, and pushed and banged, and like, you know, never beside me are the libertarians. Never. Always beside me are conservatives. Always.
Yes.
They're the only ones who will go out and fight.
Well, it's interesting because we have I'll name names. Dr. Drew, I guess, identifies. He's speaking at Freedom Fest there. He's a libertarian. I was cheering on Dr. Drew all through the early parts of COVID. He was against the hysteria, against the lockdowns, against the mandates. And then I don't know what happened, but he literally, somehow his career got threatened. He literally flipped and went on an apology appeasement tour. And to me, I see that happen with many libertarians. They just want to be liked. Even people who I really respect. In European libertarians, originally, you know, they were on the wrong side of lockdowns and other things. And it's almost like they want to be relevant in the media. So they always want to work with whatever narrative the media has, and then just sort of tweak the solutions a little bit. And they're content with that. Whereas you're right, evangelical Christians, conservatives, they want to go after the whole thing and fight it and overthrow the narrative. But you're not going to have a libertarian generally at your side when you do that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very cheerful. On that cheerful note, Mark.
Trashing libertarians today. Okay.
Yeah. It reminds me. I remember being at a libertarian event with Andrew Breitbart, and we saddled up together, standing at a bar, and he just said, "I just don't, I'm not comfortable. These aren't really my people. I mean, that they just weren't exactly in the same way. They weren't fighters like." As you said, like, yes. Bizarrely, these evangelical Christians, who, I say bizarrely because before I knew who these people were, I would have thought that. And now, of course, I know who these people are, who are courageous and bold and stand up and fight and really, really fight. And the libertarians want to be, I think they want to be popular. And I feel like that's maybe what Andrew said that day.
I think that's right.
They want to be, liked.
Who's the rational optimist from Europe? What's his name?
Lombard.
Not Lombard. No, it's anyway. But I mean, there's some of the libertarians were coming out early on calling them clampdowns, and we need to lock down harder. Yeah. I mean, and now they're against them, but they never really acknowledge their past advocacy. So it really is. I think it's a relevance, want to be liked. And it's part of our problem. And the other reason is you have a lot of liberals who identify as libertarian because of the social issues they can basically be for any liberal social issue. And they also know that on the economics issue, that's an irrelevant issue because the libertarian economic position, you're always going to lose. I mean, there's no one winning on economic issues in Washington or the EU right now. That's a lost cause. But you can win on the social issues, on drug legalization, on whatever other issue you want to pick. And I think they tend to gravitate toward the side that they could actually win on and make political progress immediately. The other side is all to them just. I guess the word would be, it's an idealism that's never going to happen. In other words, they don't ever really expect to achieve economic libertarianism.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to point out, and we should go. I mean, Andrew Breitbart was an adopted agnostic Jew who should have had, and who was brought up in Los Angeles, right? Who should have had libertarian, socially liberal viewpoints, and probably did have socially liberal viewpoints, but he did not feel comfortable in libertarian circles. He felt comfortable in conservative evangelical circles. And that should tell libertarians something, if they're listening, if they really are interested in changing the world.
Please.
Well, the moderator of my debate here at Freedom Fest is Michael Shermer, who does Skeptic Magazine. He sold out years ago on climate. I remember when I was in the Senate, when Al Gore's first movie came out in 2006, Michael Shermer announced essentially Gore was right. And this was the libertarian author of Skeptic Magazine. It's just incredible. So when I think of, and of course, the Cato Institute here in Washington, they purged out people like climatologist Pat Michaels for whatever reason. They no longer even deal with the climate issue except to capitulate. So it's an incredible world. So anyway, I shouldn't be saying all this because I'm here at Freedom Fest, and I do distinguish between the Libertarian Party and a conference like this, because the Libertarian Party is a little bit different. That's even more some of the negatives we're talking about here.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
I finally saw saw your text. I watched your stand-up routine.
Oh.
You did, I guess, and I loved it. You have the perfect attitude. I mean, it just, you had it. And are you going to be doing that again anywhere? I mean, you should really make that a thing.
Well, funny enough, they wanted me to go with Katie Hopkins, because Katie Hopkins was on with me, and then we were going to go to Nashville, and then the people who were organizing it, you know, to do another thing in Nashville, and then I haven't heard from them, but I would love to do it again.
Well, I'm here with Heartland.
Yeah.
I'm here with James Taylor. Do you want me to? Are you going to Heartland in Vegas in October?
No, but I'd love to.
I'm going to talk to him, and I'll send them the link specifically. I'm going to talk to him about that, because if you could do a climate great reset, there's a conference is all on that. So I'm going to recommend that, because they need entertainment. I think it'd be great. Something like that.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
All right.
Good to see you.
Mark.
Okay.
God bless.
All right. Thanks. All right. Bye.
That was great. And
well,
I'm really
it turned
looking
into
fantastic.
It turned into a bit of a libertarian bash at the end.
A little bit. But I do have such a clear recollection of that day when I did one of these days. Another great moment in my life. Any day you were meeting Andrew Breitbart, such a great day, and we were at an event. A libertarian event, and he definitely expressed those reservations. Let's put it that way: reservations about how he felt about them and their lack of courage, basically, when it comes to the big issues and their lack of fight. And he was a fighter, and he was our friend. And Mark is our friend, Mark Morano. What a great guy! And we'll have him on again, because unfortunately, this is not getting any better anytime soon. And we need to talk to Mark and find out ways that we can help get the story out. And everyone can go, by the way, if you're ever looking for information on the climate wars, look at climatedepot.com. Climatedepot.com is where Mark is, but also he has written these books. He's got a documentary. We'll put all the links up to all of Mark's things. Because he's just fabulous. What else we got going on today?
Well, I mean, here's a little favorite story of mine, actually, and it sort of ties into the recipe I'm going to be cooking later on, actually. In a sense, you know, Kodak is associated with, you know, I think Kodak really became famous with the Spanish Civil War. There were a lot of those, that was probably the first. Oh, yes. Probably the first war that was extensively
that was filmed. Yes, I think it's famous for that. You
know, and the dying soldier and all this. And it's, you know, I suppose it's also famous for a lot of fake photographs, but we won't go into that. And, you know, Kodak has been known throughout then for war photography and photographing atrocities and, you know, and rightly so. But now a photographer, let me get this up, actually. Kodak deletes post by photographer who called 𝙎𝙤𝙤 an Orwellian dystopia. And so after public backlash in China, the American company dropped an Instagram post featuring images of a region where accusations of human rights violations have drawn intense scrutiny. So basically, Kodak, this guy took these wonderful photographs of the atrocities on the Muslims in
Xinjiang.
Xinjiang, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, Patrick Wack, French photographer, he made several trips to the area in recent years and collected his images in a book. In his book, he talked about it's a visual narrative of the area's, quote, abrupt descent into an Orwellian dystopia. And, you know, that is actually one of these facts. It's kind of correct, right? And even if it isn't correct, it's his opinion, right? But it's actually
he's allowed to say that.
You know, it's uncountered that there are significant human rights abuses in the area. You know, the Chinese say, no, it's an insurgency and all that. I mean, there are two sides to every story, but it's undisputable that there's an Orwellian dystopia there, whether it's justified by fighting a war or what, you know, I don't want to, you know, join. So, and Kodak, that's what they've been famous for, and that's what they made their money on. That's what they gained their reputation on. But like everyone else, like all these liberal and woke companies in Hollywood, they will attack human rights abuses in Georgia, i.e., a voting bill in Georgia, but they won't attack forced sterilizations of Muslim women. They won't attack concentration camps. They won't attack mass rapes. They won't attack rounding up of millions of people and putting them in re-education camps in these areas, because they want to protect the Chinese market and they don't want to offend China. So next time some woke company tells you, you know, that they're canceling someone because of something they said about some person in America, just remember these people are all kowtowing and censoring people who want to point out legitimate issues with China. So they have no moral high ground at all. In fact, they're in the gutter where with the Chinese authorities. That's where they belong. That's where they are. Don't listen to them. Shame on you, Kodak, and shame on all the other woke companies. Now I want to go to our next interview with Justin Hart, who's going to break down the craziness of the COVID era. He's an expert at it. You really have to follow him on Twitter. He's going to talk about the madness of the Delta variant hysteria. He's going to talk about the facts behind the lack of facts behind the hysteria. I did the interview earlier. I think we were worried about Anne's internet collapsing in the middle of it. So I did the interview on my own. Let's hear what Justin had to say and why we should all keep calm and carry on. And now we're joined by Justin Hart, data analyst extraordinaire. Justin, it's just myself today, as I was saying earlier. Good to be with you. Welcome to the show. I honestly thought, I don't know when's the last time we talked to you, but I honestly thought, when we started talking to you, maybe in 2020 during the pandemic, I honestly thought, well, that was nice, but we won't be needing to talk to Justin for much longer. I mean, because
this is a difficult proposition. It was absolutely about a year ago that we started up Rational Ground sometime in June. And our premise there was we thought we were basically over and done with this thing. We knew that COVID was still going to be around. We thought that we had gotten through the worst of it. We thought the lockdowns would lift, and then everyone got freaked out about cases. And guess what? Same thing is happening again. The cases are going up. We're still testing like there's some type of massive regime and pandemic going on. Whereas deaths are down 60% compared to last year. Cases are down 40% compared to last year. And we're at, basically around 200 deaths a day. But a lot of those are reported deaths going back into the future. So, what's old is new again, right, Phelan?
Yes, exactly. When you say reported deaths, what does that mean?
Well, when you go back, what happens is a lot of these counties, because all the data originates at the county level. It originates at the hospital, but it's all gathered at the county level. And so the counties will actually go back. And when you actually attribute the death to a specific date, it's not, so 200 people may have died yesterday, but it's unclear. The 200 deaths that were reported yesterday definitely didn't die yesterday. They died over the last 2 to 3 months. In some cases, counties will go back to last May and count deaths from there. And so these totals, these numbers, they mean nothing anymore, no more than the cases that are coming out, because the CT levels on these machines are still set way too high. We have so many problems. We've never learned anything. And you see politicians freaking out again on both sides of the aisle, threatening lockdowns and left and right and masking up our kids for no good reason. There's no data to support it. The scary Delta variant that everyone is freaking out about it. All the data coming in shows that it's perhaps more transmissible, but definitely less lethal. And we know that, we have a lot of pharmaceuticals. And of course, we have some vaccines, especially for those who are in the riskier age group. I feel very confident that we'll get through this very quickly and that a lot of these scary things will peak. But, right around the corner, the Gamma variant, right after that, the Lambda variant. I mean, it'll just go on and on, Phelan.
Yeah, well, a bit like poverty, it looks like the pandemic will always be with us. And there's seems to be a certain level of people who want this to be, who want us to be in permanent lockdown. I mean, I saw there, I think it was in Australia, a big state in Australia, people were locked in their houses, 900,000 people locked in their houses, and there's been one death.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. And no one thinks about the flip side of this equation. We've talked about this before, how, something as very minor as you might think about, keeping kids home from school for a few weeks. Well, guess what? Just those few weeks of being home from school for across the country in the spring of last year, the sharp-eyed teachers and administrators at school missed what they would typically find, which was 250,000 cases of potential child abuse and domestic abuse. And so, that's just a flip side. When you get to the health issues, it gets even scarier. 50% of immunizations were missed by young infants. 50% of cancer diagnoses were missed. That was the scary thing when oncologists started raising the alarm. And this was in April of last year. They said, you know what? we'd typically be diagnosing a lot more cancers. We're not, because people are too scared, or they were locked in their homes. They felt like they couldn't go out to get medical help. And the DER data attests to that. Alabama, for example, which has been in the news for a terrible reason because some doctor decided to take the limelight, their ER is down 25 to 30% year over year. Anyone who tells you that the hospitals were overwhelmed don't know what they were talking about. Those hospitals were never overwhelmed. The vast majority of hospitals across the country are way, way underperforming, and don't see those, sort of headaches this was all about at the beginning, right? The whole thing about flatten the curve was don't overwhelm the hospitals.
Yeah.
They were never in any threat there.
I mean, that was the thing. We were told at the beginning this was to flatten the curve. And that makes a certain amount of sense. Don't overwhelm the hospitals. That the virus was going to do what the virus was going to do. The idea of the lockdown was to flatten the spread, flatten the curve.
Yeah, the scary thing is there's a whole contingent of people who want to get us to what they call zero COVID, which is a terrible and awful consequence, as I'm told by people who are in authority to know. And so, for example, one doctor out of the UK has noted that they just came out with a study. A fossilized tooth from 32,000 years ago has relatively the same strain of RSV and other respiratory viruses that we have today. There are still strains of the 1889 Russian flu and the 1958 and the 1972, and of course, the 2009 H1N1. Those are all still with us. So the notion of getting a respiratory virus down to zero has no basis in history and will only make life more miserable for the people that are just trying to get around and live their life now.
So tell us about the Delta variant. And tell us. So you're saying the idea that there's an explosion in cases is misleading.
Yeah, we believe so. In fact, cases last year around this same time were about, I think, 60, 65, 68,000. Right now, they're about 30 to 40,000. So
a day.
We have, a day. So we have fewer than that. But again, these are tests that people are coming back with. We also know that the type of disease that people are experiencing, the type of attributes that they're seeing with the infections are basically similar to a common cold. In fact, the dreaded losing your sense of smell is no longer in the Delta variant as we understand it. There is some evidence that it might be more transmissible, but at the same time, we find that the hospitalization rates are lower, that there really is no concern. Now, there is a concern coming up from this new variant, the Gamma variant, which from a study that the CDC just published indicated that it kind of goes around the Pfizer virus. But it turns out they had a set of miners across the sea, I think in Italy somewhere, I can't remember, maybe it was in Africa. And there was about 60, 70 of these miners, some of which had gotten vaccinated, some of which already had COVID. Of the ones who got the Pfizer vaccine, there was a significant secondary rate infection of the Gamma variant of the virus that's coming up. Guess who didn't have any problem with the Gamma variant virus? The people who had already had COVID-19. In fact, all the evidence points to significant, substantial protection if you've already had the virus. So we know from the CDC's own numbers, over 150 million people here in the United States have already had the disease. Probably a good portion of them don't know it. And so we are already, we believe, at herd immunity. What we're seeing right now is a massive testing regime. And it has its problems, definitely has its problems.
So you're saying it's the testing that's uncovering fake cases? Are you saying fake cases or
Well, they're non-viral cases. So in the case of the Delta variant, we have new data that just came out from a study yesterday, and it noted that of the, I think they had a very large sample size of children who had contracted the disease. Now, when you get a viral disease, and I know this because I was in the hospital several years ago with a staph infection, and they were always sending out my blood samples to put into a petri dish and to test around and see if they could grow the virus. That's the one sure way to know if you have a live virus in you. And we were constantly waiting for the sample to come back negative, that it couldn't grow anything. That meant that I didn't have any live virus in me. Well, it turns out that 69% of the positive tested kids, people that tested positive for COVID, they could not grow the virus. They could not grow the virus. And of adults, it was 60, it was like 55% couldn't grow the virus. And we've known this for a very long time. It's because when they do this testing, what they do is a massive magnifying glass on the RNA or the particles of the samples that you give them. And they run it once, they say, did we find the virus? No. Well, let's amplify it 2 times. Do we find the virus? And they keep going until they find the virus. Well, what we find is that anything over 25 times amplification, if you could use that term, in what's called the CT values, that anything over that is not a live virus. And guess what? It turns out 50 to 70% of all these tests are coming back with no live virus. And I think that's what's happening with the Delta virus, is triggering those. And it basically just means very little.
So yeah, is that why so many people who've been vaccinated
I think, we'll say again, what do you mean?
Well, I've just come across so many examples of people who've been vaccinated who are now testing positive.
Yeah, I mean, look, the challenge, I think that's part of the problem there as well, which is that vaccination is not meant to stop necessarily the infection. It's meant to stop the disease. And so if you do test people that are vaccinated, if they come down with mild symptoms, it's very well possible that they have the virus. Now, it turns out that you may have even more protection if you had the virus already. And we know that the mRNA virus is focused on a particular protein, a particular spike in COVID-19 or of SARS-CoV-2 and that virus particle there. And again, I want to make your audience aware, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, and I usually wouldn't insert myself into this domain, but they sure seem to be inserting themselves into my life, my kids' education, my health, my business. And so I hope they'll forgive me if I've checked their math, because that's my expertise. And that sort of statistical analysis, as we look through it, as I reach out to different groups, Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins, even people like Monica Gandhi, who's out of the UCSF, all these people are now attesting that this pandemic is waning down, that we should move on to regular life.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about the Prime Minister of England, Boris Johnson, who has had COVID, quite severe COVID? He's had double vaccination, and he came into contact with someone who tested positive, and now he's quarantining for 10 days.
I mean, look, our lives will never get back to normal if that's the case, because we know that 30% of the common colds that you get are basically SARS viruses, right? Or are COVID viruses, not this COVID-19. But we know that, that might trigger some of these tests. There's so much that could trigger some of these elements there. And so when someone gets it and you're now paying it, you're basically living your life by what your phone dictates to you. It's a very bad way, especially if you're already vaccinated. These are just terrible, terrible, nonsensical decisions. No logic, no basis in science in them. It's just basically fear-mongering, as far as I can tell, or just nervousness and everything else.
It is a sad reflection on where we are as a society, that kind of fear-mongering and politics is driving so much policy.
Yeah, and look, to be clear, COVID-19 is a very deadly virus for a very certain portion of the population. We know that if you're under the age of 65, your chances of dying of COVID are relatively small, about the same risk that you face if you're commuting on your way to work. If you're over the age of 65, it's about the same chances you would take of dying if you were a professional truck driver. We also know that there is a lot of information that's being misread into a lot of these diseases. A lot of the people who are dying, we know that 90% of people who have died from COVID are over the age of 65, I believe, or maybe it's like 85%. But we also know that less than 1% of those deaths had no comorbidities. People need to have a serious clinical condition to really succumb to this disease. Now, there is impact of just getting the virus as well, but we think those are no more common than any other respiratory virus you have. The only indication we've seen that is really unique to COVID is the lack of smell or taste. That typically comes back after a while. And in some cases, it may take a while for that to come back. There is no evidence at all that there is anything unique about what they call long COVID. It's the same sort of respiratory issues that you would face if you had caught pneumonia or any other type of respiratory disease.
I have to say, I'm a little skeptical of long COVID, everyone's got long COVID. To me, it's the same as fibromyalgia and other diseases that are hard to pin down, but seem to affect certain people. I don't know. It definitely long COVID seems to also affect people who like long publicity.
There's definitely a psychosis around this altogether. And my kindest interpretation is a lot of people are suffering from PTSD from this.
Yeah.
I got a note from a friend up in Orange County, between you and me. I'm in San Diego, you're in LA. And he said, Justin, my parents both died within 4 months of each other this last year. And they died, not of COVID. They were elderly, but they died from undiagnosed issues that they had, one with a cancer, one with a blood infection. They were too scared to go out and seek treatment. And we know that's the case for a lot of people. In fact, a lot of those are going to be headed back. We know for certain that the biggest issue that a lot of the medical society are facing right now are the massive amount of psychiatric issues that especially our youth are facing. Now going into their third year of schooling, that might still be affected. Can you imagine our kids? And in LA, it looks like that's the case. They may not even get back to school. What a terrible proposition.
The consequences of this are just going to be for generations. It's awful. It's truly shocking, and it's truly depressing. Justin, I look forward to someday getting back to talk to you about data that's not COVID related. But I just never thought that 1 year after we started talking to you, that we'd still be talking about it as a live political issue.
It's crazy. And steel yourself, because it looks like it's coming back again. It's time to go to war again with these forces that for some reason want to keep us welded up inside of our apartments for life.
Very depressing. Okay, Justin, thank you. Hopefully I won't be talking to you again, but unfortunately it looks like we will. So thank you very much.
Well, in good news, come back to me in 4 or 5 weeks. I'm going to have a new baby, and maybe we can bring it on the screen and bring joy a little bit to people's lives there.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Philip.
Thanks.
Okay.
All the best. Bye.
Just to remind people how to find Justin Hart. So Justin, he's on Twitter. He's really brilliant on Twitter. And I think it's Justin_Hart on Twitter. And you should really go and find him. He's really, really wonderful. And I think he has a website as well, where he's putting a lot of this data. And we'll put that up again in the show notes, because people would like to follow Justin. He's been a lovely friend to us since the beginning of the COVID, since the beginning of the pandemic. We've had him on many times, and he's a great voice for sanity and for following the data.
Yeah. So I want to just talk briefly now about the mainstream media and Cuba, and mainstream political parties and Cuba, and mainstream movements in Cuba. So, I wanted to kind of say, the one thing I wanted to say about this section was that for me, it was extraordinary that BLM have come out in favor of the Cuban authorities. And, I don't know, maybe I'm very naive or whatever, but I would have thought that that's almost, if in a sensible world, right, you would think that would be the end of you as a movement. You're coming out in favor of the, autocratic, communist.
Tyrannical, communist people, authority that is ruining, that is making life miserable and horrible existence for people living in Cuba, and
taking away their freedoms.
BLM have sided with the powerful.
By the way, as have Sinn Féin in Ireland, which possibly are going to be the largest party in the next government of Ireland. They've come out in favor of the Cuban government as it is. Against the people who are in the streets marching for freedom. I mean, unlike probably many of the people in Sinn Féin have been to Cuba looking for arms in the past, but I'm not sure. I'm sure BLM people would not want to live in Cuba. I've been to Cuba, and I remember talking to someone from Romania who had experienced communism, and they had been to Cuba as well. And I said, what do you think of Cuba? Because everyone tells you how wonderful Cuba is. It's this kind of Potemkin village of 1950s America. It's frozen, like a lot of these places, like Venezuela. It stopped in the 1970s when they brought in socialism. So all the development, all the beauty is pre-communism. And again, Cuba stopped in 1959. So it's this old America with old cars and that. And I remember saying to him, what did you think of it? He goes, yeah, everyone loved it and it's beautiful. He said, to me, it was just communist Romania with palm trees.
Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, none of these people would last a minute. BLM, they wouldn't last a minute. They'd be imprisoned under a communist regime. And by the way, we had all this thing about the Afro-Caribbeans not being not being underrepresented in Lin-Manuel Miranda's In the Heights. You should go to Cuba to look at how Afro-Cubans are being treated in Cuba. I'll tell you, there's no fun there.
Well, actually, funny enough, today I heard a speaker at a conference in Ireland, and I heard a speaker make a really great point. He said, you talk about apartheid, and particularly for BLM, that I think something like 80% of the population of Cuba are Black, and that population are not represented in the leadership in the country. The people who are running the country are predominantly white. And I hadn't heard that point before, but it was Kevin Myers who made that point speaking today at this conference. And I thought, wow, there's an extraordinary factoid. He said, if you really want apartheid, there's the place to go for it. And then you find BLM siding with these white guys, basically, who are
white guys. Yeah. Maybe I know Lin-Manuel Miranda wants to readdress his underrepresentation of Afro-Latino people in the Heights. So maybe he could set his next musical in Cuba. And there you go. Marches.
Good luck.
Two people could be out protesting, and they could look across this crowded protest and fall in love, and then get killed by Castro's communists.
Unfortunately, that's the truth of it. That's the truth of it.
So so I mean, not to labor this point, but why would we expect anything from the people of Sinn Féin or BLM when you've got things like the LA Times? I'm just looking, I get an email from them. Thousands of Cubans marched on Havana's Malacanad and elsewhere on the island to protest food shortages and high prices. It's like, that's not what they were. Freedom, libertad, or whatever they were shouting, does not translate, we hate food shortages and high prices. It translates into freedom. And again, New York Times, how hunger has fueled the Cuba protests, and then they and then another one, in shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans. That's the New York Times. Freedom is not freedom is not an anti-government slogan, actually.
I thought that was very funny. I mean, I think that they really exposed themselves with that. It's like, really, did you reread what you just wrote there? Yeah, kind of extraordinary. All right, Phelim, I think we've come to the really exciting
now we're on to the
highlight
of the show, really.
I'm excited about this. I'm very excited about this. Now, Phelim, what little delight are you going to share with us today? What did you cook for us today?
Since my wife abandoned me,
let's be honest.
My wife abandoned me. And when your wife abandons you, and summer comes in, a young man's fancy turns to his youth, and
this is Phelim's youth. Phelim went to Spain a long time ago, and discovered tapas. He discovered tapas, actually, and he particularly loved one part of the tapas meal and he decided to make it. Right.
That may have been what I told you. Mm-hmm. But the truth is always a little bit more complicated now. I mean, it's very much like, actually, I remember when we had Dean Kane on, and he talked about his love of Spain, and it was inspired by reading Hemingway and all that. And I had a similar thing. I read a lot of Hemingway, and I read a lot of Orwell, actually. George Orwell's book about the Spanish Civil War, Homage to Catalonia, is absolutely brilliant, right? And he went and fought for the socialists. And it's actually absolutely brilliant about journalism and truth, and what's really how messy wars are. In fact, he talked to Kevin Myers there, and I remember talking to Kevin about the Troubles, and he said, he said it perfectly. There's this leftist thing that the first casualty of war is the truth, and he goes, it's not. The first casualty of war is sanity. So Orwell was very good on the insanity of war, the madness of war, and so I'd read some of that. And by the way, just for the record, Hemingway is hugely overrated. Like, he's the world's densest, boring writer. I remember there's one scene, but he did write wonderfully about food, and he did write wonderfully about basically that's it. I remember there's one scene.
This is a very, very long introduction, by the way, to Phelim's food, which people are going to start thinking, are we going to get to the food at all? Yes, we're going to get to the food. So are you saying, Phelim, that your introduction to Spanish food was through Hemingway, boring Hemingway?
No, then there was a girl. I met a girl I met a couple of girls in Belfast from Spain, and then I was remember I was going to go, maybe you long before your time, sweetie.
I remember you wanted to live in the Basque area.
I was going to go and live in Spain and become an impoverished English language teacher / writer.
Then instead of that, you met an impoverished English language teacher. I was an impoverished English language teacher for a moment.
Yeah,
in my past.
No, actually, it's quite funny. I finished journalism school and applied for one job in a newspaper, and there was no jobs in newspapers, and every job had 100 people in for it. I applied for one job and then packed my bags to go to Spain. Went over, did the interview, and started to go towards the airport.
Job.
And I got the job.
The best laid plans, you know.
Yes.
And look at you now.
And
I'm going to gather you in here, there, Phelim. Then, so we are going.
You're going to edit me.
I'm going to edit you here, Phelim. We're going to hear Phelim's Spanish tortilla recipe here, which is actually really delicious and is a little bit of work now. I would say it's a little bit. It's not. I wouldn't say it's the simplest thing ever, by the way.
Come on.
For me, okay. Well, actually, I think one of the big tricks, could I be right in saying to you, Finland, that one of the big tricks with it, and luckily you're very lucky because in our kitchen we have it, is the mandolin.
Yes.
Because slicing the potatoes, which have to be peeled first, slicing them evenly, uniformly is very important. But can I make just a quick PSA about mandolins? I love mandolins, by the way. I love the mandolin, right? However, I would say if there's children in the house, Magda's listening there, you can't have one. I would not own one if I had a child in the house. And if you have children coming over to your house, you need to find a mandolin and you need to put it, I don't know, in the gun closet and lock it, because people. Anyway, and for any grown-up listening who has a mandolin, don't ever take a shortcut with the hand safety thing, whatever that's called. Don't ever take a shortcut. Don't think I can just rub it a couple of times. Don't ever think that. Okay, Phelim, go ahead and tell us how to make
can I tell my recipe now?
Yes, sorry. I just feel very strongly about this. I feel very strongly about this because I've actually cut myself a number of times because I've thought, I can do this. Yeah, okay, so, on you go.
Whose recipe? Okay. Can I? Yes, thank you. It's good to be allowed to tell my own recipe. No, phew. Okay, that was a short. And by the way, yeah, exactly. You know, the mandolin has been misused by one Anne McElhinney. Right. So, I mean, by the way, it's only 3 or 4 potatoes. But first of all, peel the potatoes and peel the onion. I used 4 potatoes and 1 onion, 1 large onion. You'll see me there using a mandolin, but it's not that hard.
Did you dry the potatoes then?
Yes.
Did you dry them before you put them into the oil?
I did. I put them on a kitchen towel. I also put a bit of salt and pepper on them, which a lot of recipes tell you to put the salt and pepper in the egg mixture. I season as I go along. You
season everything as you go along. Very good, Phil.
That's how I live my culinary life, you know. And get a cup of olive oil. Put it in a pan. Most people tell you put the onions and potato in together. The trick is to put the onions in a few minutes earlier so that they're more caramelized than the potatoes. That's one of the secrets. So that they add a bit more sweetness to the thing. Let it cook and so throw it into the boiling oil. Make sure the oil, and the way you'll know it's boiling is throw 1 slice of potato in, and once it starts curling up at the edges. And once the potatoes start breaking up, you know the thing is cooked. Take them out and be careful. Pour everything into a sieve or into a colander. Capture the oil underneath it. I do it there in the sink. Then they say, you know, a lot of recipes say 6 large. I do 8 eggs, 8 medium eggs, and crack those in, stir those in. Then put the potatoes in. Now the trick here is let the potatoes sit in the mixture for as long as you can, 15 minutes, you know, that'll really let the potatoes absorb everything and bring everything in. And then basically put a little tablespoon of oil in the pan and pour the mixture in and let it cook and high heat initially for a couple of minutes. And then when it looks like it's cooking around the edges, get a spatula and you'll see there, peel the edges back and tip the pan up and you'll see the watery egg going underneath and cooking. Then here's the tricky bit. Get a plate. Put the plate on top of the pan, flip it over, and you'll see there it is at the bottom. Hopefully it's not overcooked. And then slide that back into the pan, cook for another few minutes. Voila, there you are. And you have your tortilla.
And what you can do, right, Phil? So you can eat it like that, but you can also eat this cold, which is another way to eat it, right? What way would you serve it, Phil? And would you serve it like with sriracha, or what would you serve with it?
Hot sauce or mayonnaise is what it's like.
And of course, if you were in a tapas bar in Spain, Phil, they would give you a nice glass of wine to go with that, wouldn't they?
Of course they would, indeed.
A little Rioja.
Many's the time I've had that glass of wine in a bar in Spain. You know, if you want a bit of color in it, finely chop up a red pepper. Or half a red pepper, and it just don't forget to cut out the white bit off the pepper and de-seed it,
and all the
chop
seeds,
it up really finely, and that's
very sweet as well. It's very sweet as well, the red pepper,
and it just adds a bit of color to when you cut the side profile of the tortilla. It adds a bit of color to it. So there you go. That's what I'll be eating for the next few weeks as my wife continues to desert me.
Gallivant around Ireland. So we've come to the end of the show. I'm, as I said, a continent away from the love of my life, which is not a good thing, but everything else is fine. And I will be back. And I will have a great recipe, by the way, next week. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for bringing us to $1 million on the Hunter Biden movie. We're going to be there. This is going to happen. And please do tell friends, tell anyone that you think cares about getting the truth out to the public, because we have to be more creative than we have been in the past. And go to mysonhunter.com, and give what you can. And thanks so much for all of you who have donated so far. We love you.
Thank you, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.